You're sitting in my seat, rookie. You're sitting in my seat, rookie. Yeah. I didn't see your name on it. Everything in this room is mine.
Then you're collecting things you can't handle. Hand over the food and stand up. If you're hungry, take it.
You giving up already?
I'm giving you a way out.
What is that? You think you're scaring me? You don't look like a fighter. That's because real fighters don't need to look like one.
Everyone expected the new black prisoner to break down when the block's biggest bully cornered him at lunch. But what happened next? Nobody in that room will ever forget. Everyone in the cafeteria froze. Forks stopped midair. Conversations died instantly. Chairs screeched to a halt. Even the guards, who usually pretended not to notice anything, paused mid-step. Because the bully who ran the entire block suddenly stepped backward, like he'd just seen a ghost. But here's the part nobody in that room understood. Not yet, at least. That moment didn't start with shouting. It didn't start with a fight. It didn't even start with anger. It began with a quiet man and a simple tray of prison food, a dry sandwich, a bruised apple, a few crumbs on a plastic tray, ordinary, forgettable, like the man who held it. To everyone else, the new guy looked like someone who didn't belong there. He kept to himself. He spoke softly. He didn't push back when shoved in line. He ate alone, head down, without making eye contact. And in a place like Block C, silence wasn't strength. Silence was an invitation. People whispered about him on his first day. On the second day, they watched him quietly. And on the third day, the cafeteria buzzed with a dangerous kind of anticipation, because everyone could feel it coming. Viper Block. His self-appointed king finally decided to test him. Viper was the kind of man who didn't have to announce himself. His footsteps did that, heavy, slow, intimidating. When he walked across the room, inmates shifted out of the way like water parting around a boulder, and now, those same footsteps echoed louder than usual as he approached the new black prisoners' table. People nudged each other, eyebrows raised. Heads turned, something was about to happen. Marcus, the new guy, didn't flinch. Didn't look up. Didn't react at all. He just lifted the top slice of his sandwich, checked it like he'd checked it 100 times before, and took a quiet bite. But around him? The entire cafeteria held its breath. Viper stopped behind Marcus, towering over him. He cracked his knuckles, loud enough to be heard across the entire room. Then he leaned down, so close that his forehead almost touched Marcus's neck, and yet Marcus didn't move. That stillness, calm, steady, unshaken, was the first thing that made Viper frown. Still, he pressed on. "Hey," Viper growled, his voice dripping with authority he thought was unshakable. "You're in my seat, rookie." Marcus didn't turn. Didn't stand. He simply paused for half a second, just half, and kept eating. A murmur rippled through the cafeteria. Nobody ignored Viper. Nobody ever had. But Marcus! He acted like Viper wasn't even there. Viper slammed his hand on the table. The tray rattled. The apple rolled off the edge and hit the floor with a thud. The entire cafeteria jumped. Still, Marcus didn't react like a scared man. He only lifted his eyes, slowly, calmly, not with defiance, but with something Viper had never seen before. Control, real, trained, dangerous control. And that's when it happened. For the first time since anyone could remember, Viper stepped backward. Not much, just a fraction. But everyone saw it. It was subtle. But it was there. A man like Viper didn't step back. Not for anyone. Not for any reason. But in that 1 second, before anyone knew Marcus's past, before anyone knew what he was capable of, before anyone realized who he truly was, Viper felt something he never felt in Block C uncertainty. It was primal, instinctive. Something deep inside him whispered, "This man is not what he seems." It wasn't the way Marcus stared at him. It wasn't the steady breathing. It wasn't the calm posture. It was the absence of fear. Fear was the currency of Block C. It filled the air. It lived in the walls. It kept the place running, but Marcus brought none of it with him. Instead, he brought something else, something silent, heavy, and powerful. Presence, a kind of presence that comes from a past soaked in discipline. A kind of presence that comes from facing real danger, not cafeteria bullies. A kind of presence that made the entire room sense an invisible shift. Even before they understood why. And that is when the cafeteria fell into absolute silence, not because Viper demanded it, not because the guards shouted, not because of a fight, but because for the first time in years, every inmate, every guard, every eye in that room recognized one undeniable truth. Viper had chosen the wrong man to mess with, and the calm, quiet prisoner everyone underestimated was about to change everything. Block C had a name everyone whispered, Viper, big, tattooed, loud, and feared. His reputation wasn't earned. It was built, brick by brick, through years of dominance. Viper didn't just walk into the cafeteria. He owned it. The guards turned their eyes away when he passed. The other inmates shifted, cleared space, and prayed he wouldn't look in their direction. He had rules, unspoken but iron. Nobody sat in his seat. Nobody touched his table. And absolutely nobody challenged him. The cafeteria was his kingdom. And Viper didn't tolerate strangers in his kingdom. So when the new prisoner arrived, a silent, composed black man named Marcus, rumors started before he even took off his processing wristband. What's his charge? Never seen him before. He looked soft, that word spread fastest. Marcus wasn't small, but he moved like someone who'd spent his whole life trying not to disturb the air around him. He kept his hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed, eyes lowered. Not broken, just quiet. In Block C, quiet was dangerous. To most inmates, it meant one of two things: fear or mystery, but to Viper, quiet meant weak. He won't last 3 days, someone whispered near the lunch line. 3? He won't last till Friday, another replied, keeping his voice low enough so Viper wouldn't hear. Marcus didn't respond to any of it. He didn't posture like the others. He didn't puff his chest or spit insults to earn respect. He didn't even look anyone in the eye. He simply took his tray, sat at the far end of the cafeteria, and ate slowly, like a man used to being alone. If he heard the whispers, he ignored them. If he felt the stares, he didn't show it. He walked with calm steps, the kind that belonged to a man who either didn't have enemies or didn't fear them. But fear? Fear was Viper's favorite seasoning. On Marcus's second day, Viper noticed him. Really noticed him. The way Marcus kept his head down. The way he never reacted. The way he moved like the world wasn't watching. To Viper, that wasn't humility. It was disrespect. Who does he think he is? Viper muttered to his crew. Walking around like he's better than this place. And because Viper hated anything he didn't understand, Marcus instantly became a target. By day 3, the tension was thick enough to chew. The cafeteria buzzed with the usual noise, metal trays clattering, inmates roughhousing, guards pretending to care. When suddenly everything shifted. Viper stood up. He didn't rush. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. When he rose from his table, the noise dimmed automatically, like the room itself was holding its breath. Viper cracked his knuckles, rolled his neck, and nodded toward Marcus. "This is going to be fun," one of his cronies said. But the truth, it wasn't fun. It was ritual. Every time a new inmate entered Block C, Viper had to make an example. Respect wasn't suggested, it was extracted. He moved across the cafeteria with slow, deliberate steps. A few inmates scooted their chairs out of his path. Others lowered their heads, pretending they weren't watching, even though every muscle in their faces was tight with anticipation. Everyone knew what was coming. Nobody dared stop him, not even the guards. Somewhere near the back, a fork clattered to the floor. Someone muttered, "Marcus is done." Another whispered he should have kept his distance. Marcus, for his part, didn't look up. His shoulders stayed relaxed, his breathing steady. He cut a piece of bread calmly, as if he were eating breakfast in his own kitchen instead of being seconds away from the most feared man in Block C standing over him. Viper shadowed his entire table. He waited a second, letting the silence thicken before speaking. "You're in my seat." The words fell like a hammer. Every head in the cafeteria turned, every eye locked on Marcus. This was the moment everyone expected Marcus to crumble, apologize, move away, or beg. But Marcus didn't do any of those things. He simply lifted his head, slowly, deliberately, and looked Viper in the eyes for the first time. And for the first time in years, Viper froze. Marcus sat alone at the end of the long metal table, quietly eating a simple sandwich. 2 slices of plain bread, a paper-thin layer of turkey, nothing remarkable. But Marcus ate it like he'd eaten hundreds of meals before, slowly, deliberately, with no rush and no emotion. He didn't flinch. He didn't look around. He didn't react when footsteps behind him stopped, or when the heavy shape of a man's shadow stretched across his tray. But everyone else reacted. Half the cafeteria went silent as soon as they saw who was standing there. Viper. He leaned down, placing one enormous hand on Marcus's shoulder, squeezing just hard enough to show he could crush it if he wanted to. His voice came out low but loud enough to echo off the concrete walls. "You're sitting in my seat, rookie," a few inmates snickered. Others shook their heads, already predicting how this would end. This was Viper's game, his ritual, the part of the day he enjoyed most, establishing dominance. Marcus lifted his eyes slowly, calm as still water on a windless lake. "No anger, no fear, just quiet acknowledgement. I didn't know it was yours," he said softly. Viper grinned, showing teeth. "Oh, it's mine," he said as he tapped the edge of Marcus's tray with one thick finger. "Everything here is mine. So hand over the food and get up." The cafeteria shifted, as if the room itself sucked in a breath, a wave of... The cafeteria shifted, as if the room itself sucked in a breath. A wave of tension rippled across the tables. Forks paused mid-air. Chairs stopped moving. A guard near the exit stepped forward but didn't intervene. This was Block. "Imre, you don't interrupt Viper. Unless you want to spend the night filling out paperwork and the next month watching your..." Back Marcus blinked once and looked down at his sandwich. The crust was slightly burnt. The meat was uneven. It wasn't worth a fight. Nothing in this room was. Not to him, he exhaled softly. Then pushed the tray forward with gentle hands. "If you're hungry," he said, "you can have it." Some inmates exchanged confused looks. Others rolled their eyes. To many, Marcus had just confirmed their suspicion. He was weak. Viper smirked, satisfied. This was too easy. Another name added to his growing list of people who feared him. But that smile, wide, cocky, dripping with victory war, wouldn't last long. Because just as Viper reached for the tray, a voice cut through the cafeteria like a blade slicing clean through rope. That wouldn't be a good idea. It wasn't loud, just firm, controlled. But somehow, impossibly, everyone heard it. The entire room froze. Who said that? Heads turned. Inmates craned their necks. Even Viper paused, fingers inches from the tray. Marcus didn't move for a moment. Then he slowly stood up, not fast. Not threatening. He rose the way a man does when he's trained to control every motion, when standing is not a reaction, but a calculation. His hands came up, but not clenched in fists, and not raised in defense, palms open, shoulders squared, feet planted with precision. A stance so disciplined, so precise, so deliberate, that a few older inmates went stiff. One of them whispered under his breath, "Oh, Helga, that's not normal." Viper's grin collapsed. His eyes narrowed slightly, trying to process what he was seeing, because he recognized that stance too. Everyone who'd ever fought seriously recognized it. It wasn't a street fighter stance. It wasn't a prison brawler stance. It wasn't the sloppy, adrenaline-fueled swagger Viper was used to breaking. This was different. This was cleaner, sharper, deadlier. Marcus kept his voice low, calm and steady, like a man who knew exactly what he was capable of, and exactly what he could do to the man in front of him. "I don't want trouble," he said quietly, "but you should walk away." There was no bravado. No threat, no shaking, just certainty. And certainty is the one thing Viper had never seen in a rookie before. A murmur spread across the cafeteria. Why is he standing like that? He trained somewhere. That's not beginner stuff. Viper should back off, but Viper, stubborn, proud, and desperate not to lose face, took a single step forward, and just that one step told everyone in the room. Viper had no idea what kind of man he had just picked a fight with. A guard rushed over, eyes wide, almost tripping over his own boots as he pushed through the crowd of inmates. His voice cracked with disbelief as he blurted out, "Is that Sergeant Marcus Hale?" You could have heard a pin drop. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Someone stood up just to get a clearer view. Even the domino players in the corner, who never stopped their game for anything, went silent. The air felt different now, heavier, charged. Viper, who had moments earlier been brimming with confidence, stopped dead in his tracks. His hand hovered uselessly in the air. There was confusion on his face, then recognition, then something nobody had ever seen in him before, hesitation. "Sergeant?" Someone whispered from another table. "You mean military? Wait. Marcus Hale? No way. That's him?" The whispers spread fast, crawling through Block C like electricity. Because Marcus Hale wasn't just some former soldier. He was a name passed around like a legend. A decorated combat lifesaver, a man who ran into fire when others ran away. A man who pulled bleeding comrades out of burning vehicles. A man who shielded civilians with his own body in places so dangerous. Most people refused to even speak their names, but legends rarely look like legends. When life breaks them, Marcus had come home with scars that weren't always visible. The kind no medal could fix. The kind no parade could heal. And when life spiraled, when one bad decision led to another, he ended up here, in a place where strength is loud and brutality is currency. But Marcus? His strength was silent, his calm demeanor, his steady, unblinking eyes, His slow, deliberate steps. They weren't signs of submission or weakness. They were the traits of someone who had seen more than any man should ever have to see and survived. Now Viper, the man who bullied half the E, block into silence, was standing face to face with someone who had faced far worse monsters than him, and didn't even flinch. The guard took a step forward, his gaze locked on Viper. "You lay a hand on him," he said, voice firm, controlled, "and you'll regret it. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Viper's jaw tightened. His fingers twitched. For years, fear had worked for him. For years, everyone stepped aside. For years, he was the apex predator of Block C. But predators survive because they recognize a stronger predator when they see one. His eyes locked with Marcus's. No anger. No fear, no challenge, just depth. Just discipline. Just the quiet confidence of a man who understood violence on a level Viper never would. Viper tried to speak, maybe to save face, maybe to threaten, maybe to joke it off, but nothing came out. His voice betrayed him before he could even form a word. Marcus didn't take advantage of the moment. He didn't puff out his chest. He didn't step forward or gloat. Instead, he did something that shocked everyone, including Viper. Marcus lifted his hands slightly, not in surrender, but in reassurance, and spoke with the steady calm of someone talking a man off a cliff. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. His voice was gentle, measured, human. "Not to me. Not to them. You're better than this." The words hit harder than any punch Marcus could have thrown, for the first time in years. Maybe decades. Viper's mask cracked. Just a little. Enough for everyone to see that beneath the muscles, the tattoos, the growls, there was a man who didn't know what to do when someone treated him with respect instead of fear. The entire cafeteria remained perfectly still. A few inmates exchanged glances. Others stared openly, shocked. The atmosphere felt surreal. Like everyone was witnessing something impossible, something that defied the unwritten laws of prison life. Then, slowly, Viper lowered his hand. Not in defeat. Not in shame, but in acknowledgement. Without another word, he turned around, his shoulders no longer puffed, his steps no longer heavy, and walked away. And that was the moment the entire block realized a man like Viper had finally met someone he couldn't break. Someone he didn't want to break. Someone who didn't rule through fear. But through honor, nobody had ever seen Viper retreat before, and nobody would ever forget the day he did. Later that week, something happened that nobody in Block C could have predicted, not even the guards, who thought they'd seen everything. It was lunchtime, the usual chaos. Trays clattered, voices echoed, metal scraped against cement floors. But suddenly the noise shifted. A strange ripple moved through the cafeteria. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Even the card game in the corner froze mid-hand. Viper, yes, that Viper was walking toward Marcus. But this time there was no swagger in his step. No scowl on his face. No rage simmering beneath his tattoos. He walked slowly, carefully, almost uncertainly. The inmates watched in stunned silence as he reached Marcus's table. Marcus looked up, calm as always, his hands resting neatly beside his tray. Without a word, Viper pulled out the bench across from him and sat down, not looming over him. Not crowding him, or claiming territory, just sitting. The room tightened with anticipation. Everyone expected a confrontation, a demand, a threat, anything. Instead, Viper cleared his throat, a small, awkward sound that didn't fit a man his size, and said two words no one believed he even knew. "Thank you." It was quiet, barely above a whisper, but it hit the cafeteria like thunder. Some inmates blinked, certain they misheard. Others leaned in, stunned. The guard dropped his pen. And Marcus simply nodded, as if the moment wasn't as shocking as it felt. Viper rubbed the back of his neck, eyes fixed on the table. "You, He exhaled, searching for words that didn't come naturally to him. "Nobody talks to me like you did. Not without trying to be tough. Not without trying to challenge me." Marcus didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. He let Viper speak at his own pace. "You didn't look at me like I was a monster," Viper continued. "And you didn't try to prove anything. I ain't used to that. For a man who barked orders and ruled through intimidation, it was the closest thing to vulnerability anyone had ever heard from him." Marcus nodded again. "Everyone deserves respect," he said quietly. "Even men who don't hear it often." Viper's eyes flicked up, just for a moment. Something human was there. Something tired. Something that had been buried under years of anger and fear, and the need to appear invincible. When Viper stood up to leave, he didn't pound his chest. He didn't glance around to see who was watching. He didn't try to reclaim dominance. He simply placed a hand on the table, a gesture that felt almost like a truce, and walked away. And from that day forward, Marcus wasn't just the quiet new prisoner anymore. He became someone Block C respected in a way they'd never respected anyone before. Not because he threw punches. Not because he shouted. Not because he demanded loyalty. But because of his presence, steady, disciplined, grounded. He brought a kind of gravity to the room that didn't need words. Even the guards noticed it. Even the troublemakers felt it, and Viper. He changed, slowly at first, subtly. The threats stopped. The bullying stopped. The loud, territorial posturing stopped. The cafeteria, his old kingdom, no longer revolved around him. He didn't guard his seat like a throne anymore. He didn't snatch trays, shove rookies, or start fights just to maintain control. Something Marcus said, or maybe something Marcus was, had shifted something inside him. He began nodding at inmates instead of glaring. He started eating quietly instead of broadcasting his dominance. He even stepped in once to prevent a fight instead of starting one. People noticed. They whispered about it. Half confused, half impressed, all because one man showed him what real strength looks like. Strength without violence. Respect without fear. Confidence without ego. In a place where loudness ruled, Marcus's silence changed everything. And that's why the cafeteria went silent. Twice. The first time, when they thought Marcus was about to be crushed. The second time, when they watched the most feared man in Block C walk away humbled. And changed, if this story moved you or opened your eyes in any way. Don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who needs inspiration, and subscribe for more powerful stories that hit deeper than you expect. Before you go, what would you have done if you were in Marcus's place? Would you stay calm like him? Or react differently? Tell me in the comments. I read every response.